the media relations team at Netflix, and I'm very delighted to introduce you to Linda Schuyler and Stefan Brogan from our new series, Degrassi Next Class. And Linda, I'm going to have you start off. A lot of us have heard of Degrassi or watched it growing up, or had the sister who watched it and we didn't want to admit that we watched it. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about how it started and where it got to now?
You realize we're going back over 35 years.
Yes, so quick jog down memory lane.
Well, for those of you who don't know, in my 20s, I spent about 8 years as a junior high school teacher. And it was during that time that I absolutely got to love teenagers. Many people felt that, you know, they were just angry and had attitude, and I felt that they were nervous and unsure of themselves, and I really fell in love with teenagers during my junior high school years. And I kept going to the Toronto Board of Education where I was teaching and saying, these kids need special stories for them. They're not preschool anymore. They're partially kids, they're partially adults. They're going through all kinds of first experiences in their lives, from sexual awakening to political awakening. We need stories for them. And there wasn't anything, and I would get so frustrated. And I had studied a little bit of film and television, and now we're going way back into the 70s here, so there wasn't a lot in college in those days. But I had studied some, and finally, it was like in frustration, I said, you know what? I'm gonna make these shows. And I quit my very secure job as a school teacher, and started out, and it was the kids of Degrassi Street that came first, which, interestingly, I had no idea at the time that it would be the beginning of what would become a 35-year-plus franchise. But a lot of the choices and decisions that were made in those very, very early days, such as having an ensemble cast, casting with diversity, having your cast be age appropriate, being fearless in terms of the subject matter that you might take on, and keeping liberal doses of humor around. They all became sort of building blocks that, as you look at, as Degrassi has morphed and changed over the years, a lot of those building blocks have stayed with the show. And then we've seen it grow and change, junior high, Next Generation for 14 years, and now here we are on Netflix with Degrassi Next Class, and how exciting is this?
Very exciting. Now, Stefan, you had a very unique experience on Degrassi, going from in front of the camera to behind the camera. So how has that been, and what changes have you seen?
I mean, I started out actually with Epitome once I was trying to transition into behind the camera with this thing that Stephen Snow was trying to explain to me about that we were doing these webisodes, something that was for online, and we didn't know what that was yet, and there was no real, we didn't know what the audience was and how it was going to work. All we knew is that they should probably be about 2 minutes, and they had to be watched on the screen this big on your little Nokia prior to an iPhone, you know? And that changed very rapidly about what they were supposed to be, what we could tell. You know, we were just like, everything's gonna be shot like this, into what started becoming a medium that we could actually tell a real story added on to our Degrassi universe. So we went from this responsibility of just like trying to find little bits of filler to things that could actually expand the story of Degrassi, to the point where, you know, we were shooting them in the network in Canada wanted just to air them half the time, and there was a very strange convergence of the two, funny enough, now that we're on Netflix, that the experience has been changing rapidly to the point now that we are in a situation where we're allowed to be a little bit more honest, I think, with our storytelling. That the communication with our cast has changed, with our crew, and we find ourselves, the big change this year is trying to tell people that they're allowed to do the Netflix version of Degrassi, which is that they don't have to, a lot of time with the cast I'm telling them, don't worry about telling the audience how you're feeling. That the words do the work and do the Netflix version. They go, got it, know what you're talking about. And I think it's just sort of, you know, our characters have always been about being human, being a teenager, but they first of all understand a shorthand that they have discovered. They are the Netflix audience in a lot of ways, and they understood right away that we were allowing them to be a little bit more mature in their performances, and they didn't have to necessarily feel a mandate maybe to play it safe. And Degrassi's never been safe, but I don't
Stefan,
think.
I think you missed an important part out of all this. Stefan became the director of all these wonderful web components material, but he was part of the Zit Remedy, and he was Snake.
I have been involved with the show since I was 13 years old.
I met him first when you. How old were you when you first started?
I was 12 or 13, I guess.
12 or 13, and so he did 6 years as Snake with the Zit Remedy on junior high and high. Transitioned with us into Degrassi next class as our teacher, as a principal. Then my husband Stephen and I were so aware of how astute Stefan was in terms of picking up all the influences that were happening around, and so it felt like an ideal fit for him to also go behind the camera and work on some of this web material, which has now led to him being our star director on the show, and he's cleaned up awards all over, so I just need to say that about him.
They've been very kind
awesome.
to me, and it's been an amazing career with this company.
So Degrassi has been renowned and respected for having these authentic storylines and handling them delicately, but with the respect they deserve for both a teen audience, but and their parents as well. So how have you kept that? I know the tagline this year is fresh and familiar. So how has that developed now that you're on Netflix?
Well, we won a Peabody Award a few years ago for the episode that we did. We had introduced a transgender character to Degrassi, and I am very fond of quoting the citation that they gave us, because they said that we neither sensationalized the storyline nor trivialized it. And that is really an approach that we try very hard to keep. We're fearless in terms of our subject matter, and we're loving being with Netflix now, because we know that they are equally fearless along with us. But we do have a mandate, though, to not sensationalize and not trivialize, because if we want to be the authentic voice of teens, we really do have to look at both sides of the issue, and I think that's what and casting age appropriate, keeping kids our actors the same age as the characters they're playing, has all been very important to the show. But Stefan's right. When we announced to our current cast that there was going to be a change this year and that we were going to move to Netflix, there was this huge uproar, and they were cheering, and when
There was whining going on before. Why are we on Netflix? Who should we? And you're like, okay, whatever. But it's really been a dream come true in a lot of ways. Our audience is there,
And it was really fun, because when some of the executives from Netflix came up to visit us, it so happened, it was the day that we were shooting, get ready for this, the 500th episode of the franchise. So we had a big cake on set, and there was a photo op going on, and the Netflix executives came, and we said to the cast and the crew, we'd like to introduce you to the Netflix executive. There was spontaneous clapping and hollering, and Andy and Tamara said, we've never ever received that kind of response before. We're executives, that never happens to us. So,
Well, speaking of response, how has it been, and what feedback have you gotten from both teenagers and parents alike of episodes having addressed issues that were relevant in their life, and using that as a discussion point in their relationship?
Well, the funny thing, I think you have to think about first of all, what our response was when we're sitting in the editing room versus I think we were episode 6, or Linda and I were sitting in editing, and we finished the episode. We're already kind of freaking out about what we're doing, and then she turns to me, and I just remember you looking at me going, it feels like old school Degrassi. It feels like really old school Degrassi. We're talking, it's been a while since we've been able to do, Arthur and Yick talking about wet dreams, or JT trying to figure out your penis pump, And those stories are not necessarily the ones that the network goes, please tell more of those. And we got to Lola and her dealing with her vibrator and female masturbation, and we couldn't believe we were telling the stories again. And they were so honest and true, and we would have read-throughs. And so I think we always had to deal with our reaction to how we were back again in this really honest place. When we went live on Friday, that was the first reaction, was that you are telling stories that the ones that didn't want to like the show because it's not their show anymore. It's like I'm 23 and I had my class, with Drake, are them watching it and they're going, I'm feeling something that I don't think I've had a chance to in a while. The reaction is that there's a new honesty, a new candid nature to our show that is like a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways.
And I think another thing that happened to us when we were going into development for Degrassi Next Class, we realized that we were talking to a whole new audience. When we started Degrassi Next Generation, which was 15 years ago, a lot of the kids who we're talking to now, who are Generation Z, weren't even born when we started that, who were basically our audience then were the millennials. Then we had another interesting revelation. Anyway, we understood that the kids who are watching our show now, their parents were the Degrassi Junior High, the Degrassi High age. So we've now got this really interesting dialogue going on between parents and kids. And you were just sort of saying what, some of the reactions that we get. And I keep a book behind my desk, and it's basically called Why I Do What I Do. And because there are some days as an independent producer when you're trying to get the bank financing all happening and meet payroll, that you really wonder, why do I do this job? Then I go back and I read some of the emails and some of the letters that we've had from viewers, and you mentioned sort of parents. There was a really moving email that we got, and it was after the episode where Marco came out. And I got a letter from a woman who said, my son a few years back told me that he was gay, and I suggested that he might not want to come home again. And I saw your episode on Marco coming out, and I picked up the phone and I called my son for the first time in years. So we know that the show has an ability to reach and to cut across generations.
Amazing. All right, I was going to open it up. Any questions for Linda and Stefan?
On that note, I was going to ask you how it felt to have an episode where there were two openly gay students competing for student body president, and sexual orientation was not even a plot point. That was not the crux of that particular storyline.
And that just shows you how the interesting thing about Degrassi is how the times change and how we've always been very supportive of the LGBTQ community, but how those storylines come out has been very different. When we did junior high, the closest we got to having a gay character was your brother. And he wasn't one of our main characters. And so then when Marco came on the show, he was our first openly gay character, and I think that was like 2003 or 2002. And he went through a series of coming outs. Now we've got characters who join the show and they're gay or they're bi, or there's a fluid sexuality, which is a reflection of the times. And so it's just, if it's out there and that's what it is, that's what our storylines are about. And if you'll notice, the third person who was running in the election was a hijab-wearing young woman who had very strong opinions and felt...
But it wasn't about her wearing a hijab.
No.
And so our audience is freaking out that wear hijabs, going, they just have a character, and she's kind of like a pain in the ass about feminists, but they're not talking about her headgear. And that was, I think, what the allowance that we have now is that we're not sitting there trying to have teachable moments.
Right.
We're sitting there and letting these characters exist, love them and hate them, and they're going to go through things that will drive you to places that you go, that is me, I am having, yes, you can't, just because you're dating someone doesn't mean you have the right to have sex with them, which I saw our audience explode about. But it's not overtaking the episode. So they're having their lives move on, and they're existing in a world where they know these people exist. And we don't have to go, well, Billy's pansexual. We can just say that they're in their world, and the worlds they live in personally, and the worlds that they're watching on television, and it allows for so much more story, which is great.